Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, delivering for you the best analysis, discussion, and debate that you will find online concerning the game we love, college football. Each and every offseason, I deliver my conference rankings. That's, of course, when the entire season has been played, and we've got results from all the Power 5 leagues and all the games between each other, regular season, postseason, and, of course, the college football playoff. All right. I'm doing it right now as an update after week 3 because most of conference play starts in week 4. That means most of the non-conference games are in the books. Aside from Notre Dame and their schedule, aside from some of BYU's schedule, and a few other games here and there, most notably the SEC Eastern Division rivalry games on the last weekend of the season against the ACC, about 85 to 90% of the non-conference games between the Power 5 are complete. So we can deliver a good look at the Power 5 and how they stack up, because once they start to play inside their own conferences, they play in a silo, and every conference finishes 500. So these are the games that matter in regards to trying to rank the conferences. We start with conference number 5. It's the same conference that began the season at number 5 because it's the conference that performed the worst last year, and especially in postseason play. The Pac-12 maybe has performed a little bit less embarrassingly than it did in the postseason last year. 22-10 non-conference scheduling, 4-5 against the other 4 leagues. All right, these are the good wins or the big wins in the big games. Arizona State over Michigan State might be the best win for the conference. Arizona State at home against Michigan State. Last second field goal, Pac-12 wins 16-13. All right, Colorado, Nebraska. Huskers had the lead 28-20. Buffs come back, win it late 33-28 on a long touchdown pass. Cal over BYU. BYU did not look like a quality opponent then, but they did beat Arizona in week 1 and, of course, pulled off the upset in Wisconsin in week 3. So Cal beats BYU 21-16. Stanford over San Diego State over the Aztecs, who had defeated the Cardinal last season. So Stanford does come back to get the win 31-10 in dominant fashion in the second half. Big losses for this conference. The biggest loss is not an embarrassing loss, but it's just a big game. Washington goes to Atlanta. They play Auburn in week 1. They lose 21-16. This is big because Washington is the main hope, so we thought, for the Pac-12. And now it really appears as though Washington is the team, and they lost a slugfest with the Auburn Tigers 21-16. So this does not help, of course, the Pac-12. Oklahoma routs UCLA. Texas over USC. The Trojans led it 14-3 in Austin. Longhorns win it with 34 consecutive points. Not a good showing for the Pac-12. Bad losses. Houston beating Arizona, not just 45-18, but they led this game 38-0 against what is supposed to be a Heisman Trophy candidate, no longer, in Khalil Tate, and an explosive offense in Arizona, no more. Houston led it 38-0 before there were any points put on the board by the Wildcats. They lose 45-18. Bad loss. BYU beats Arizona at home in Tucson. So the Wildcats look awful. They're 0-2 against non-FCS foes. Cincinnati over UCLA. So the Bruins are 0-3, and they get off to the rough start at home in the Rose Bowl, losing to a group of 5 American Conference team by 2 scores after they led 10-0. Bad loss for UCLA and the Pac-12. Another one. This one is on UCLA as well. They just lost last weekend to Fresno State. Not a horrible loss, even though it is a group of 5 defeating a glamour team in the Pac-12. But on top of that, 38-14, Trojans go down at home. San Diego State wins a close one at the wire against Arizona State at home after the Sun Devils beat Sparty the week before. Bad loss for the Pac-12. And finally, this one understandable, this one predictable, but still a Pac-12 loses to a group of 5 Oregon State, down by Nevada 37-35. So once again for the Pac-12, 22-10 non-conference. The Power 5 record is at 4-5, and the wins are not nearly as impressive as the losses. Pac-12 at number 5. Number 4 is the Big 12. And the Big 12, I would say the next 3 conferences leading up to number 1 are tightly packed. There is razor-thin difference between these three conferences in terms of the play on the field. In the non-conference games, the Big 12 is 19-7. They are 4-6 against the other four conferences. The big wins: Oklahoma trounced FAU when that game was getting all sorts of attention during the offseason. The Sooners laid waste to Lane Kiffin and company. Then they came back the next week, and UCLA came to town, and it was close for a quarter, and then Oklahoma lowered the boom. All right, Oklahoma State over Boise. This might be the most significant win if you're really putting the games into context. Boise State was supposed to be the class of the group of five, and maybe they are. They go to Stillwater. Oklahoma State's supposed to be rebuilding, and they laid it on them 44-21. West Virginia whips up on Tennessee 40-14. That's impressive. Texas scores 34 straight on USC, wins 37-14. Texas Tech over Houston, a quality team typically, that had just annihilated Arizona. So Texas Tech defeats Houston 63-49. And what about Kansas? For all this time, Kansas has been weighing down the Big 12 with horrible loss after horrible loss after horrible loss and not beating anyone ever. They not only beat Rutgers in a horrible team from the Big 12 taking on a horrible team from the Big 10, but they just annihilated Rutgers 55-14. Good win for the Big 12 and, of course, for KU. All right, big losses or bad losses? Well, this is just a big loss. TCU in a glamour game against Ohio State goes down 40-28. Not embarrassing, close game, but they lose at 40-28. Again, Iowa State, you would think that the Hawkeyes are a little bit better, and the game was at Kinnick Stadium, so Iowa State going down, not an embarrassment there, but they do lose the big game 13-3. Texas Tech, slight favorite against Ole Miss, goes down hard 47-27, bad loss for the Big 12. Mississippi State traveling to Manhattan was a substantial favorite, so Kansas State, again, losing is not a black mark for the Big 12, but in the manner in which they lost. They were not competitive in the second half, and the Bulldogs trounce K-State 31-10. And finally, Baylor and Duke. Because of Duke's injuries, Baylor actually was a favorite according to Vegas. Why, I don't know. They lose 40-27. Bad loss for Texas. For a second straight year, they lose to Maryland. Maryland turns around and loses to Temple 2 weeks later by 3 touchdowns. Bad loss for Texas, 34-29. And KU, we gave you some love, and you did win 2 games the last 2 weeks, but week 1, an awful showing against Nicholls State. The Big 12 losing to Nicholls State is unacceptable. A couple scares here. North Dakota State almost upsets Kansas State. Wildcats survive by 3. And Texas and Tulsa, the Longhorns get pushed 28-21. But the Big 12 at number 4 in our Power 5 conference rankings. 19-7 non-conference record, 4-6 against the Big 10, the ACC, and the SEC in the Pac-12. All right, at number 3, I've got the ACC. And again, this is razor close with number 2. So we look at the numbers, and then we also put the games into context. Good losses, big wins, big losses, scary games that the team looked bad, but they still pulled off a win against a bad team. Those, we put it into context here. So the ACC against the non-conference schedule goes 25-7, 3-5 against the Power 5. So it's inexplicable to me that a conference is playing 32 non-conference games and only 8 of those against the Power 5. I know that Georgia Tech are going to play Florida State, Louisville, Kentucky, and South Carolina, Clemson. But still, 3-5 against the other Power 5 leagues. The big wins, and this is where I've got to put this into context, and this is what dropped the ACC to number 3. There are really no big wins. The biggest win, possibly, Duke beat Northwestern 21-7. That's the best win for the ACC. Not the biggest win, but the best win. Duke beat Baylor 40-27. Miami beat Toledo. They're a group of 5 team out of the MAC, and that was actually one of the 3 best wins for the ACC. Miami over Toledo in a dominant fourth quarter, 49-24. All right. No good losses for the ACC where they kept it close, but they got a number of scares. here. Clemson, Texas A&M. Of course, Clemson defeating probably the best team outside the league that has been defeated by the ACC in Texas A&M, especially on the road, but it was only 28-26. So a scare for Clemson in the ACC. North Carolina State only beat James Madison 24-13, and they were only up 17-13 on James Madison in the fourth quarter. Louisville down 14-6 in the fourth quarter to Western Kentucky, gets by the Hilltoppers 20-17. Tulane takes Wake Forest to overtime, but Wake survives 23-17 in New Orleans. And, of course, the infamous Florida State showing against Samford, losing 24-13 in the second half, and they come back and win 36-26, and Florida State is weighing down this league right now. Bad losses all over the place for the ACC. Miami trounced by LSU. Pitt completely annihilated by Penn State, 51-6. South Florida beats Georgia Tech. Really good game, 49-38, but the Yellow Jackets give up the final 3 touchdowns and lose on the road to South Florida, a group of 5. Indiana, Virginia, like-seeded matchup, the type of game that you would expect lower teams in those two particular divisions, but Virginia and the ACC lose at 20-16. And Cal, North Carolina, nothing embarrassing about losing to a decent Cal team, 24-17. But losing to East Carolina, and North Carolina not just losing to ECU, they lost 41-19. Embarrassing. Clemson by far the best in the league right now, and Boston College may in fact be the second best team in the ACC, with Miami, Duke, Virginia Tech all in the running, possibly North Carolina State as well. Florida State is a disaster right now. All right, we move to what is right now the number 2 league in America, and not necessarily very impressive, but it's almost by default that the Big Ten comes in at number 2, but it was razor tight over the ACC and the Big 12. The non-conference record for the Big 12 is only, for the Big Ten is only 24-12, 6-7 against the Power 5. The quality wins. Ohio State, TCU, this game for the Buckeyes in the Big Ten may have vaulted the Big Ten past the ACC. On the strength of that one game, it's that close. Buckeyes beat TCU 40-28. Penn State, not a big win over Pitt, but a big win in the manner of dominance here, 51-6. Indiana beats Virginia, as we just mentioned. That's a like-seeded game. Also, Maryland probably with the second most impressive win for the Big Ten, defeating Texas 34-29. Iowa got the win over Iowa State. Iowa State then turned around and gave Oklahoma a good game into the fourth quarter. So Iowa with a nice win, 13-3 over Iowa State. Minnesota over Fresno, even though that's an expected win when you look at Big Ten versus Mountain West. It's a Mountain West team that won 10 games and went to the conference championship game last year. Good win for Minnesota and the Big Ten by a touchdown, 21-14. There were a few scares here, and they could have been monumental. Penn State almost lost to App State. They needed a last-minute drive to send the game to overtime and then won it in OT over App State. Michigan State on opening night barely gets by Utah State 37-32. And Illinois by Kent State after trailing 17-3. The Illini win it 24-17. All right, the bad losses are almost too many to count. Michigan State, Arizona State, we'll have to see how the Sun Devils play the rest of the season, but this could be a bad loss for the Big Ten, and Michigan State certainly unexpected during the preseason. But once we got past the Utah State game, we knew that Sparty was vulnerable, and Arizona State looked better. So not necessarily a surprise here, but a showdown between the Pac-12 and the Big 12, and the Big Ten goes down Michigan State, Arizona State. Temple, Maryland. Maryland not only loses to Temple, who lost to Villanova, they lose 35-14. We mentioned Kansas, Rutgers, embarrassing for the Big Ten, 55-14. Akron beat Northwestern. Northwestern is probably the one team in the Big Ten, the one good program in the Big Ten that almost consistently loses to MAC teams, and they do it again this year. Northwestern blows a 21-3 halftime lead and loses to Akron at home 39-34. Bad loss for the Big Ten. Colorado's 3-0. They did defeat Nebraska. Not a great showing for the Big Ten, of course. They led 28-20. They lose at home 33-28. The real black mark on the Big Ten is here. Nebraska loses to Troy at home 24-19. Not good. Purdue loses to Eastern Michigan 20-19. And, of course, the biggest of the black marks, the biggest worst loss for the Big Ten, not in terms of embarrassment, because BYU may actually turn out to be good this year, but Wisconsin is a college football playoff contender, losing at home to an unranked BYU team 24-21. Worst loss thus far for the Big Ten in terms of national perception and college football playoff impact. Big losses for the Big Ten. Of course, Michigan losing to Notre Dame. No embarrassment on the road, but losing that game, a marquee matchup. Michigan goes down 24-17. Illinois, South Florida. The Illini were a heavy underdog, about a touchdown to 11-point underdog in this game. So it's not necessarily the loss, but again, the Big Ten losing too many games to the group of five, in particular the MAC. But this year, South Florida wins over Illinois for a second straight year, 25-19, as Illinois was up by double digits in the fourth quarter. All right, there it is for the Big Ten. It's not impressive, but considering the woes from the ACC and the Big 12 and the Pac-12 especially, they rank second right now in college football. That brings us to the best conference in the Power 5, and it's not close. The numbers don't even justify how well the SEC has played. It has to do more with them winning all the big matchups and them coming close in some games in which you could understand them losing big, but they didn't. They challenged top-tier teams like Notre Dame and Clemson. Let's look at the SEC's resume to date. 28-5 non-conference record, only 6-3 against the Power 5. But again, let's understand these games. LSU throttled Miami. Auburn beat Washington. Mississippi State went to Kansas State and won by 3 touchdowns. Ole Miss beat Texas Tech by 20 points. Mizzou and Purdue, like seeded teams last year. Mizzou goes to Purdue this year after they lost to the Boilers last year at home 35-3. They make amends this year and get the revenge 37-34. And Bama didn't just beat Louisville as expected, but Louisville's a team that typically wins 8 or 9 games in the ACC. Bobby Petrino's built a nice program at Louisville. They typically finish in the top 25. So Bama as a number 1 team, as what most people would consider the best team in the country, beating Louisville is not a huge win for the SEC, but the dominance. They didn't just beat Louisville by 2 touchdowns. They could have scored 80 points. They beat them 51-14. No scares for the SEC. So we have seen scares or bad losses for the SEC in recent years. Florida's gone down a couple times. Jacksonville State took Auburn to overtime. South Alabama beat Mississippi State a couple years ago. None of those kind of scares for the SEC, at least maybe for one team. Okay. The SEC, before we get to the bad losses or the big games that they lost as well, 2 what you would consider, in quotes, good losses for the SEC. Vanderbilt could turn out to be the 12th, 13th best team in the SEC, the 2nd or 3rd worst team in the conference. They went to Notre Dame, and Notre Dame could win 9, 10, 11 games this year, and Vandy only lost 22-17. They had the ball down to the 10-yard line in the closing minutes to pull off the upset. They were down 16-0, and they came back. Good showing for the SEC. And also, in a similar fashion, Texas A&M at home against Clemson only loses 28-26 on a failed 2-point conversion. So a loss for the SEC, but very understandable against maybe the best team in the country. Bad losses, blame Arkansas, SEC fans. They lose to North Texas, not only 44-17 as a 7-point favorite, but they completely put themselves on the map in embarrassing fashion with that ridiculous punt return, the fake punt return that everybody saw and talked about that North Texas pulled off against Arkansas. So the Hogs embarrassed themselves on the field actually playing football and getting duped and getting thrown all over the highlights, losing to North Texas, the mean green, 44-17. A week after Colorado State beat Arkansas in Fort Collins 34-27. And, of course, West Virginia put down the throttle against Tennessee and won 40-14. Alabama's the clear choice as the best team in the SEC right now. LSU has the best resume. Texas A&M has played well. Mississippi State as well with a big win. at Manhattan against Kansas State. Auburn, of course, taking care of business out of conference against Washington. And Georgia looks the part despite not having played anyone. So again, we rank the conferences like this. Pac-12 at number 5, Big 12 at 4, ACC at number 3, the Big Ten's number 2, barely, and by far the best conference in the nation. And we will have to put this argument on hold at least until the last week of the season, when the SEC goes up against the ACC in 4 games, and then certainly in the postseason, bowl games, and the college football playoff. But for right now, no question, the SEC is the best conference in college football. Please subscribe to my newsletter that's released each and every Monday, The Voice of College Football. You can do so by sending your email address to MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Send your email address to MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That enables us to deliver the best college football discussion, debate, and analysis you will find anywhere online. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.